Good afternoon. I don't know if you've had the urge today to skip out and take advantage of this beautiful sunshine that we have, but I wouldn't blame you if you had. But I'm happy that you're joining us today. I'm Julie Davis, president of City Club, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's program. Before we get started, I want to remind most of us in North America that we live on stolen land. Here in the Portland region, this is the territory of the Multnomah, Cathlamet, and Clackamas, the Tualatin, Kalapuya, and Malala, the Wasco, Cowlitz, and many other indigenous people who have known the Columbia and Willamette rivers as their home for thousands of years. Together, we recognize their unbreakable connection to this land, and we honor the resilience of their ancestors and the hope of future generations. Today's debate is between Commissioner Chloe Eudaly and Mingus Mapps, the two candidates running for position 4 of the Portland City Council. To help us welcome the candidates, I am pleased to introduce Melinda Rogers from Northwest Natural to say a few words.
Good afternoon. I'm Melinda Rogers, the Vice President and Chief Human Resources and Diversity Officer at Northwest Natural. Thank you for joining us this afternoon to hear from the candidates for Portland City Council, position 4. Debates like this one help us make informed choices at a time when it has never been more important to vote. And with pressing issues like economic recovery and job creation, it's critical we choose leaders with the vision and the determination to create a brighter future for everyone who calls this place home. As one of Portland's largest and oldest employers, Northwest Natural is committed, along with City Club, to being part of a brighter future where we all can thrive. It's what we work toward every day by creating good jobs that pay well, by hiring employees who reflect the diversity of our communities, providing internships for women and people of color, and actively recruiting within underrepresented communities. We continue to expand our spend with women and minority-owned businesses, and we support community organizations like City Club and Partners in Diversity. We're proud to sponsor this important event and to support our city's long tradition of civic engagement. So please join me in thanking the candidates for their service and wishing them well. Enjoy the debate.
Thank you, Melinda. I also want to say thank you to Rebecca Tweed for producing today's debate and the entire program committee for working so hard to make today and every other event we're doing this fall possible. More than 100 years ago, City Club hosted its first debate. While much has changed since then, City Club continues to be an independent, nonpartisan organization committed to providing a space for people to gather and participate in lively conversations about the critical issues confronting our communities. Even today, as COVID-19 challenges our social norms, City Club continues to work toward more open and inclusive public spaces. City Club has been sustained over all of these years through the generous support of our members, individual donors, foundations, nonprofits, and businesses, large and small. Today, we are grateful for the collective support from all of our members and donors. You make it possible for City Club to host our fall season of forums and debates. I also want to take a moment to thank our season sponsors, Northwest Natural and Chevron, and acknowledge our partners, Mayoral Inc., Merge Design, Pamphlet Media, and X-Ray FM. We appreciate your shared commitment to helping Oregon voters get informed. If City Club's work aligns with your values, I hope you'll support us as we continue to produce public forums and debates, lead public policy research, and advocate for positive change. There's one really big opportunity to support City Club that is coming up, and I want you to know about it. Next Thursday, October 15th, you're invited to join City Club in the City Gala in the Square. It's a free gala, and everyone is welcome to be part of it. Just pour yourself a beverage, hang out in the chat, and let's talk about how we can work together to create a truly open and inclusive public square. You can RSVP at www.avcast.me/citygala. Thank you for being here today and for all you do to make Portland a great place to live. It is my pleasure to now welcome Dana Haynes, Managing Editor of the Pamplin Media Group, which includes the Portland Tribune. Dana is moderator for today's debate.
Hi, folks. Welcome to the City Club debate with Portland City Commissioner Chloe Eudaly and challenger Mingus Mapps, the two candidates running for Portland City Council position number 4. We have about an hour for this debate, so let's talk about the ground rules and then we'll get started. Before I do, we are all struggling with how we do our jobs with social distancing and quarantine. With that in mind, the candidates and the audience may hear from my cat, Violet, who's claiming she has not yet been fed today. In this instance, I want you to know she is an unreliable narrator. To begin the debate, each candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement. Once the statements have concluded, we'll move on to questions from the Portland Tribune for the candidates, which includes a lightning round. Once the moderated questions have concluded, the candidates will each ask one prepared question for their opponent. From there, we'll move on to the audience questions. If you haven't gotten your question in yet, it's not too late. Tweet your question or post it to the Facebook page on the City Club page using the hashtag FridayForum, all one word. Finally, we'll close the debate with a 2-minute statement from each candidate. One new twist to this City Club debate this fall is something we're calling a free speech pass. Each candidate would like to rebut a point made by their opponent, extend their own answer time, or clarify a response. The candidate simply needs to raise the free speech pass. Each candidate has 2 such passes worth 30 seconds each. And with that, we'll begin the opening statements. The candidates flipped a coin earlier to determine who would be giving their opening statements first. Mingus Mapps will go first. Sir, please begin.
Okay. Number one, thanks to everyone who helped pull together this event. I know how complicated it is to come together in the COVID era, and you folks have done a great job. My name's Mingus Mapps. I'm a candidate for Portland City Council. I'm here today to tell you about my campaign and to ask for your vote. I'm running for Portland City Council because I love this community, and I know that you do too. And probably like you, I'm deeply concerned about the direction our city is going in. We all know the problems, everything from COVID to climate change to the demand for police reform to the urgent need for racial justice. Navigating these tricky waters is going to require remarkable leadership, and that's also why I have thrown my hat into this ring. I believe I have the background and vision needed to get Portland back on track. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a single dad, I'm a Democrat, I'm progressive, and I am pragmatic. I did my undergraduate work at Reed College and then went on to get a PhD in government from Cornell University. I've split my career between being an academic, where I've taught on issues surrounding urban politics at places like Cornell at Harvard and Brandeis University and Portland State University. And I've also been a public servant here in Portland, where I've held management positions both at the City of Portland, the Multnomah County, and Portland Public Schools. Experiences like that have taught me a lot about how Portland works, and has taught me a lot about why Portland sometimes doesn't work, and has given me some ideas about how we can make Portland work better. When I'm on City Council, my agenda will be pragmatic and progressive, just like my politics. I have at least 5 issues I want to focus on right away. We need to, for example, conquer COVID, both on the public health side and the economic side. We need racial justice for every Portlander. We also need police reform, and I have deep roots in reventing policing here in Portland, so I think I'm uniquely positioned to do that. Also, I want to eliminate chronic houselessness in the city of Portland, bring more affordable housing to the city, and fundamentally reinvent City Hall by doing things like directing City Council to hire a city manager. I want to increase the number of seats on City Council, and I want to change the way we fill those seats. Right now, everyone on City Council runs at large. I think it's time that we move towards neighborhood-based electoral districts.
Very good. Commissioner?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, and thank you to City Club and Portland Tribune. My name is Chloe Daly, and I'm running for re-election to Portland City Council. A little bit about me. I'm a born and raised Oregonian, and I've lived in Portland proper since 1988. I come from a working class union family, and I'm a former small business owner and a mom. I've committed my life and my life's work to the greater good, whether through my activism, my bookstore, the two nonprofits I co-founded, and most recently leading up to taking my seat on City Council, advocacy for disability rights and housing justice. Looking back, I realize that I have really spent the last 30 years fighting for justice and standing up for people who are the least well-served and the most vulnerable in our community. And I've continued that work in my nearly 4 years on City Council. I've delivered the strongest tenant protections Portland renters have had since World War II, some of the strongest climate and environmental protections in the country, and innovative transportation initiatives such as the Rose Lane Project and healthy businesses, which, if you've recently dined outside in Portland, you have probably benefited from. Racial justice is at the heart of all the work I do. When we center the people who are least well served, we end up with policy that does the most good for the most people and a more just and inclusive society. I'm proud of the work my team and bureaus have accomplished, working hand in hand with community, and I'm looking forward to continuing that good work for a better Portland for all in the next 4 years. I would certainly appreciate your support and your vote this November, or actually October, because we live in the great state of Oregon where we make voting as easy as possible. And you can visit my website, votechloe.com, for more information. Thanks again.
Very good. Thank you, folks. I'd like to start with a series of questions on policing, an issue that we've all been talking about a great deal. Commissioner Udaley, I'd like to start with you. You voted against the current city budget because the $15 million cut to the police bureau wasn't big enough. You wanted at least a $50 million cut. With specifics, what programs or personnel would you have wanted to see eliminated?
So first, just a quick point of clarity. While I did support the community's demand for a $50 million cut, which I think is a reasonable aspiration over time, my amendments would not have reached that $50 million. My amendments would have brought another $5 million in cuts. Those cuts would be to vacancies in the Bureau, cost savings through vacancies, and that is something that Commissioner Hardesty and I are considering as we approach the fall bump.
Dr. Mapps, you've been endorsed by the Portland Police Association, the police union. Will you push for the union contract changes that polls show a majority of Portlanders want, such as an end to the reinstatement of fired police officers by arbitrators?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Good, clear answer. We're going to get this done on time.
Yep, I absolutely will push for those changes. One of the reasons why I'm in this race is to bring meaningful reform to our public safety system and to be at the table as we rewrite the police contract. I think one of the things that's most important for us to do is to develop a system for independent police review so we can hold our police officers accountable when things go wrong. That's very straightforward, and it's important for me to be there, and I think it's important to for, frankly, African Americans to be at the table as we get these important reforms accomplished.
Here's a question for both of you. Shootings in Portland have spiked since the gun violence reduction team was eliminated. Do you believe there's a connection? What would you do to reduce the shootings in Portland? And we could start off with you, Dr. Mapps.
Oh, sure. I'm deeply concerned about this. Right now, Portlanders are coming out reminding us that Black Lives Matter, but we also got to remember that in the context of street violence and gun violence. We have given up a generation's worth of progress in terms of street violence and gun violence here in Portland. I'll tell you, I used to work at 111th and Sandy, and this past weekend, there were 2 shootings in front of my old office. And not just 2 people were shot, but one person was shot at 5 in the morning, and another person was shot at the same location at 7 p.m. in the evening. This is unacceptable. If Black Lives Matter, we actually have to take care of and make progress on keeping people of color safe in our streets. And one of the things that I will do that I think our current council has been strangely reluctant to do is to take advantage of our crime analysts and have them help us understand what is happening here. Obviously, some of the violence is a product of the increase in COVID. I think some of it is clearly kind of specific to some dynamic which is happening here in Portland. I have some intuitions and hypotheses about what is driving this, but really there is no replacement for evidence-based policing, and that's one of the things that I will do when I'm on City Council is demand that City Council and our police department adopt best practices and actually evaluate the impact of our budget decisions and our policy decisions.
Commissioner?
Well, my opponent has repeatedly asserted a direct connection between the elimination of the Gun Violence Reduction Task Force and the very concerning increase in gun violence we've seen in Portland. That is simply not true. Unfortunately, gun violence has been on the rise in Portland since December. And even if that wasn't the case, trends don't happen within 2 weeks' time, which is where we saw a spike over the summer. This is actually a national epidemic, and it's really no surprise that it's happening right now amidst a pandemic that has put millions of Americans out of work and left people in extremely desperate circumstances. As far as the crime analysts at the police bureau, yes, I'm also frustrated by the fact that they're there, but they are not utilized. I wouldn't characterize that as a failure of the council. I would characterize that as a failure of the bureau. And perhaps it has something to do with the police union, which my opponent is endorsed by, who remain the biggest impediment to progressive change in our police bureau and would never endorse a candidate that posed a threat to their power or their agenda.
I have a question very specifically for Commissioner Udaley. This spring, you voted against Police Chief Outlaw's proposals, which would have allowed the city to designate when and where protests can happen. So-called time, place, and manner rules, which many cities throughout the nation employ. For about 120 days now, Portland has seen a litany of mostly peaceful protests by righteously angry people who believe that Black Lives Matter and who oppose systemic racism. But we also have seen 120 nights of violence, including arson and looting. Given that, do you still think your opposition to time, place, manner restrictions was the right vote?
Well, I had grave concerns, and so did many community advocates, including the ACLU and other organizations that bring expertise to these issues, that proposal would actually violate the constitutional rights of Portlanders. I stand by that decision. I also used that opportunity to grill members of the police bureau and ask them dozens of questions generated by myself, my office, and the community about their treatment of protesters, not just in the last few years, but over the last few decades. This is sadly a tradition of the Portland Police Bureau, is to use excessive violence against peaceful protesters. I want to draw a distinction between the vast majority of people who have taken to the streets to protest police violence and stand with the Black Lives Matter movement. They are exercising their constitutional rights. Sadly, police union president Daryl Turner is advancing a measure that would violate their constitutional rights. Very concerning to me. And the police approach to crowd control is clearly not working. They need to come up with different methods that do not gravely harm our community members and go after the people who are committing actual crimes.
Dr. Mapps, do you want to reflect on this question?
Yes, I oppose any attempts to limit the free speech rights of Portlanders or Oregonians. I think that's an important principle that every elected official needs to stand up for. And when I'm on council, I will definitely stand up for that important cause. I also want to thank everyone who's gone out and protested peacefully on behalf of the notion that Black Lives Matter. That matters a lot to this particular Black life and the two children who I have. So that's incredibly important to me, and it's an example of Oregonians being their best. At the same time, I want to talk to folks who go to these protests and commit acts of violence, folks who maybe throw a rock, set a building on fire. I want to say, please stop. Vandalism and violence does not liberate my family. It does not make us more free. Indeed, it does the exact opposite. Racism in America is built upon the threat of violence. That is why Martin Luther King was not only a champion for and a leader in an anti-racist movement. He was also the champion and leader in an anti-violence movement. That's the only way we can dismantle violence and racism. So please join me in that. And I also want to call out to the police department. When I call for Oregonians to reject violence, I'm talking not only about individuals, but also institutions. That's why our police department needs to take a gentler approach to policing.
Thank you. I have a question for both of you, and I have a follow-up. I'd like to move now into the area of homelessness or houselessness. Sure. We used to think that homelessness was a big city problem, but now we know that small and medium-sized cities struggle to serve their homeless populations. Also suburbs and small towns and rural areas. Homelessness is pervasive. My first question is the problem intractable? Is there nothing the city could do to end, I'm going to repeat that word, end homelessness? Commissioner, do you want to take this one first?
Sure, my pleasure. I absolutely don't believe the problem is intractable, and thank you for noting that this is not just a Portland problem. People are experiencing homelessness in suburbs and rural areas, and it is a national crisis as well as a global housing crisis. It's not intractable if we are willing to acknowledge that housing is a human right and a basic need that everyone should be entitled to. The reality is the city of Portland cannot solve this problem on its own. We need critical support from our state and federal government to make up for the decades of disinvestment and neglect in affordable housing, mental health treatment, and addiction and recovery support. Most of the people that we see living, struggling, suffering, and dying on our streets are people who experience disabilities, mental health issues, and addiction. I, like I said, have advanced the strongest tenant protections Portland renters have had since World War II. I have also supported and passed numerous items to help the crisis in this moment. And I've also worked, paved the way for stronger protections at the state and worked with our federal delegation as well.
Thank you very much. I'd like to say, by the way, that both of you are taking steps to keep with the time limits, and I really, really appreciate that. We've all watched some debates nationally in the last couple of weeks in which that wasn't true. So you have a moderator who's very grateful. I'd like to focus on neighborhoods for a moment. Commissioner, there's a perception that
do you want me to take a
I did not. Forgive me, sir. You're correct. I did not give you a chance to do that. Do you want to address that first question? And I apologize.
Sure, mostly because it's a very important question and a question that is close to my heart. First, I want to compliment you. I think the insight that homelessness is a regional issue is an important one, and I'm really proud of the Portland metro area for beginning to move in that direction. I think it's very exciting and incredibly important that our surrounding counties are beginning to step up and develop real homeless programming for their residents. And also, And then I want to push back on the notion that homelessness is an intractable and unfixable problem. I think we can fix it. I'm going to challenge the city to end chronic homelessness in Portland in the next 4 years. I think I can get it done.
Thank you very much. And again, I apologize for getting off my script there. I'm going to now focus on neighborhoods for a moment. And Commissioner, there is a perception that you are hostile to neighborhood associations. Can you point out 2 or 3 actions that you've taken to show that that just isn't true?
Well, sure. I have repeatedly expressed my appreciation and support for our neighborhood association system. Several people from that system engaged in our code change committee work, and some of the neighborhood associations endorsed code change. So it's a very misunderstood initiative that Civic Life undertook, and I always appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. Neighborhood associations do great work for our neighborhoods. I want the city to provide a free, easy way for neighborhood associations to contact everyone in their neighborhoods. Neighborhood associations have been struggling for decades with under-involvement and underrepresentation of many key groups like renters, youth, people with disabilities, BIPOC community members, immigrants, etc. I also want to see more money go into the community through our small grant system and perhaps supporting the neighborhood associations. The way the whole system is structured is very inefficient. I would argue that because I have advanced dozens of progressive policy solutions that benefit all people in Portland, that I have benefited neighborhood associations as well. I'm very committed to expanding civic engagement, inviting more people to the table, and sharing the mic.
Thank you. Dr. Mapps, you've defended the neighborhood system. What would you do to increase civic involvement for communities of color and other underrepresented community-based groups?
Oh, sure. This is an important question. It's true. I'm a huge fan of neighborhood associations. This is a tool of democracy that was very much invented here in Portland. I think it's one of the reasons why Portland has its culture of civic engagement. We've always made our government open and accessible to our citizens. But there have been some failings here. You know, if the neighborhood associations have failed to adequately reach out to people of color and new immigrants and the young people, for example, I really do think it's the duty of the commissioner in charge of the neighborhood association system to help them get better. I think one of the problems from the past 4 years is that instead of helping neighborhood associations get better, the commissioner in charge of that important Portland institution has been undermining them and hasn't supported them and hasn't developed the kinds of tools that would help them do outreach better. This is not rocket science. We could help neighborhood associations get better. I think it's also a mistake to assume that neighborhood associations are the only vehicle for citizens to interact with their government. I think that if that's the way you see the world, you are not seeing democracy in Portland in its fullest. Neighborhood associations are one voice, or really they're 95 different voices, but there are plenty of ways to interact with our local government. I think the key principle here is that we have leadership that respects people, that listens to people, and that responds to people. And frankly, that is not the kind of leadership that we've had over the last 4 years.
Staying with neighborhoods for a moment, this has been a very tough year for downtown Portland. Months of protest, a wide array of looting, vandalism, arson, graffiti, windows boarded over. Many businesses have closed and may not open again. Many jobs have been lost in the service sector and the hospitality sector. Plus, we're struggling to find service for an increasing number of unsheltered homeless Oregonians in the downtown core. Starting with you, Dr. Mapps, what is your specific plan regarding both violence and serving the homeless residents downtown to make downtown business owners and their employees know that you have a plan to keep downtown prosperous?
Oh, let me tell you, I completely know and feel this problem. Just last week, we were out at 6 in the morning doing a walkthrough of downtown with local business owners. And one of the things that they wanted to do was just kind of make sure that elected leaders and people who have their hats in the ring understand the challenges that they face. In our 90-minute walk through Old Town Chinatown, we counted 180 tents. Businesses, restaurants, everyone from restaurants to law offices told me, Mingus, we want to open up again. We're ready to open up again, but we can't with all the tents in front of us. Plus, this is an impending public health crisis. Once the weather turns and the rains start, COVID can sweep through our sidewalks like a hot knife through butter. That's why it's so important that we get Portlanders and our houseless neighbors inside, or at least into a socially distanced, safe place right away, frankly, before the rains start. I think we can do that through doing a couple of things: establishing more organized camps. I think we got about 500 people sleeping in Old Town Chinatown. I think with 3 more camps, we can get those folks inside and safe. And I think that the city is also filled with plenty of empty motel rooms that we should rent out to get people inside and healthy. So then we can begin the important work of cleaning up our city, sweeping up the broken glass, cleaning up the graffiti, and letting our small business owners and restaurants and skateboard shops get back to the business of being in business again. You're on mute.
Downtown prosperous.
We couldn't hear you.
Please outline your plan regarding violence and homelessness to keep downtown prosperous.
Okay. First, I think it's important to point out that the majority of the impact to downtown businesses and across the city is COVID and the shutdown, and the fact that people are just not able to move around and access businesses and other amenities like they would typically do. The protests certainly haven't helped downtown businesses in particular, but again, I would argue that the police have escalated these protests. They have this week been called out by a human rights group for violating UN guidelines during protests and deliberately aiming munitions at people's heads, targeting medics and members of the media. So I would really hope that business owners hold police accountable as much as they do protesters. We've seen largely peaceful protests in the last few weeks with violence from the police. That being said, I mentioned earlier, I was a champion for COVID relief dollars to small businesses. I helped establish the sanction camps. I support more sanction camps. And I'm urging local and regional elected leaders to really look at all our resources right now and redeploy them to get people off the streets, whether it's schools, community centers, or any other publicly owned building where we could serve people who are living outdoors.
Thank you. Moving away from downtown, for both of you, 35 years after annexation, East Portland neighborhoods still don't have good streets and sidewalks in many areas. What would you do differently in the next 4 years about East Portland? Commissioner?
Well, I'm very proud to say that I don't have to do anything differently because I have been focusing on East Portland's inadequate transportation infrastructure since I took over the Bureau. You can look at how we're investing our dollars and you will see that we have invested tens of millions of dollars of improving the infrastructure in East Portland. Justice is something that I care deeply about, and some people may not recognize that transportation is a justice issue. And when we have an inequitable system where people in East Portland, pedestrians in East Portland are twice as likely to be killed by a driver as anywhere else in the city, that is absolutely unacceptable to me. So we have been focusing our resources using an equation that looks at the highest crash corridors where we see serious injury and death and how they intersect with low-income neighborhoods, BIPOC and immigrant and refugee communities. I love being the transportation commissioner. I'm incredibly proud of that bureau. I am so thankful to Portland voters for renewing the gas tax and allowing us to continue this vital work. We really have done more for East Portland in the last 2 years than in decades. Thank you.
Dr. Mapps, what's your proposals for serving East Portland?
This is a question close to my heart. Those of you who know me know that I used to be executive director for Historic Park Rose, which is a nonprofit group dedicated to bringing development to East Portland without having displacement. And we were remarkably successful at that. We were out there fighting for crosswalks. We were out there fighting for better police protection. We were out there fighting to, get brothels closed. We were out there fighting to, get garbage service to houseless communities that live along the Columbia Slough. And that sort of community engagement around East Portland is something I will continue in City Council. Indeed, this is one of the reasons why I'm running for City Council. We annexed East Portland in the 1980s, but we've never really incorporated East Portland into the city itself. And you can just see that lack of investment when you cross 82nd. Portland down by the river is just a different place than Portland east of 82nd, and we need to change that. I think one of the reasons why Portland doesn't work now is that we have over-invested in downtown and completely neglected the folks who live on the eastern fringe of our city. I think a lot of Portlanders, especially public policy makers, tend to think of the Willamette River as being the middle of the city, but in fact, if you take a look at population centers, actually probably Gateway is the middle of the city. And I think that if we bring more development and more services to the folks who live east of 82nd, it'll restore balance to our entire community, and that is one of my key goals for my first term on City Council.
Before we go on, I need to say that we had a lot of really good questions that we wanted to get to, and we're not going to get to all of them, clearly not. For both of you, if I commit to getting you our unasked questions in writing within the next 72 hours, will you commit to answering them in writing? We will print your answers in total on our website, portlandtribune.com. Commissioner?
Absolutely. I'd be happy to.
Dr. Mapps?
Of course.
I'm trying to make up some time here because we got a slightly late start. I had a speed round of questions, and Dr. Mapps managed to answer all of them in his opening statement. So one way I'm going to shave a little time off this debate is I'm going to send you the speed round. I was going to ask everybody questions about the city charter, and I was going to ask you to do them in yes or no. But since I'm going to be sending them to you in print, and since you're going to be responding in print, let's make them not yes or no questions. Go ahead and elucidate your thoughts on changes to the city charter. But we're going to do that in the pages of the Portland Tribune. Let's shift gears now. Let's shift gears and give each of you a chance to ask your opponent a question. Commissioner Udaly, do you want to go first?
Sure. Okay, sorry, I know we only have 20 seconds. Mr. Mapps, the police reforms that you've offered are things we've already done or aren't supported by evidence-based research. The public is demanding real change. What are 3 concrete things that you would do to protect Portlanders from being brutalized by police?
Oh, sure. A very important question, Commissioner Udaly. Well, as I think a lot of people know, I've called for the police to stop using rubber bullets, tear gas, and chokeholds. I'm a big champion of creating independent police review so that we can hold our police officers accountable when things go wrong. And I will be at the table as we go about rewriting the police contract. I think that one of the challenges here is to actually write independent police review into the contract, and I'm excited to do that. It's going to be a heavy lift, but I think that it's important to bring people and Portlanders together to talk about the kind of public safety system that we want. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of dissent out there, but if you actually listen to each other, I think Portlanders are actually calling for the same kind of changes. Everyone wants a police bureau that focuses on prevention and rehabilitation and nonviolence, and I know that we can get there if we can all come to the table and listen to each other and work together.
Dr. Mapps, you have a question?
I'd like to use my free speech card. I should have written it on my palm. Thanks.
First time we've challenged this, so let's try this. Go ahead.
All right. Well, first, I'd like to point out that you didn't really offer any original solutions. Commissioner Hardesty and I have been working on a munitions ban, as you well know, because I've shared that repeatedly in these events. Commissioner Hardesty has advanced a measure to create true community oversight. And I would argue that the last thing we need is a voice for the police union at that bargaining table. They are our biggest impediment to change and transformation at the city, and you are endorsed by them, and you're their guy.
Can I use my card?
You may
Is that
use
how
your
this
card.
works? Okay. Let me say, I'm the only African American male in this race. Our current debate about police reform is very much about how Portland goes about policing people who look like me. And I'll tell you, 97.5% of Portlanders don't look like me. Oregon has struggled with issues of racial justice since we were founded more than 150 years ago. And if you want to get racial justice right in Portland, one of the things that's really important to do is that Portlanders send black men to the table when you make rules about how you're going to go about policing black men.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Mapps, you have a question for your opponent.
Sure. Commissioner Daly, I'd like to give you an opportunity to explain this concerning and I think troubling developments that we've seen over in the bureau that you supervise. I know that you're aware that the Ombudsman Office has released an extraordinary series of emails and memos talking about, frankly, abuse in a bureau that you supervise, the Office of Civic Life. And then this Ombudsman has also expressed concerns about City Hall's efforts to stop that investigation into abuse at the Office of Civic Life. I'd just like to hear your perspective on what is happening in your bureau. Why do people keep talking about abuse over there? And what's your plan to make things better?
Sure, always happy to talk about it as you continue to misrepresent that memo and the Bureau, as well as your work in the Bureau, frankly. We had a number of employees who brought BHR complaints and were not satisfied by the results because they were found to be unfounded. Some of those employees took their complaint to the Ombudsman, which is a very unusual strategy because she cannot investigate those complaints. It was suggested to me and agreed upon that we would hire an outside consultant to conduct an assessment of the Bureau, because although some of those complaints or all of the complaints were unfounded, there's clearly dysfunction in the Bureau, and an assessment is going to get to what's wrong with the culture and some of the dysfunction within the teams. I authorized that assessment. It was out of my hands, as it should have been after that moment. It was developed by the city attorney and BHR. I was under the impression that everything was going as planned. I was surprised by the release of that memo, which asserts many unfounded claims as fact. I believe the Ombudsman made a real mistake allowing her office to be politicized in this moment.
Thank you. We're almost ready to hear questions from our audience. Participants have submitted questions in advance by emailing questions at pdxcityclub.org. If you haven't gotten your questions in yet, it's not too late. Tweet your question or post it to the Facebook page of the City Club using the hashtag FridayForum, one word. Let's take a moment now to hear a message from one of today's sponsors while we collect questions from the audience.
It's only human to pursue the elusive, while also capturing the possibilities, even something like CO2. Over the last decade, Chevron has spent over $1 billion on carbon capture projects and is investing in startup companies working to transform carbon into new forms of energy.
All right. Now it's time for audience questions. I have a number of them here. I'm going to be reading them. The first one is for Dr. Mapps. I understand that Dr. Mapps is not a fan of the infill legislation, and I'd like to hear his thoughts on how to build up other neighborhoods rather than focusing on closer in neighborhoods, which is essentially, according to the letter writer, what the infill project does. Sir?
Yes, thanks for this important question. It's true, I was skeptical, even critical of the infill project, mostly because the city's own analysis shows that it will cause displacement, especially displacement east of 82nd. I think our friends and neighbors who live out there have been the city's failed those communities too often, and I just don't see how we could move forward with this without coming up with a meaningful displacement plan. They didn't. They approved it without the plan. When I'm on city council, I will hold the city accountable for actually developing a displacement plan so that our working families don't get displaced by this new legislation. And also, I look forward to making it work. It wasn't the plan I would have necessarily endorsed, but this is the plan that we have in place now, and I will work with especially nonprofits, community development corporations to bring extremely affordable housing to Portland through REP. And we'll make that happen too.
I'm going to take a moderator's approach here and allow Commissioner Udaly to answer the same question. Commissioner?
Sure. Well, I was deeply involved in the development of the residential infill policy, and I want to say that this policy really aims to correct decades of exclusionary and racist zoning code, which has helped lead us to the moment we find today with a very segregated city. I fought hard for adding sideboards that would protect people from displacement, that would protect some of the more negative impacts to neighborhoods, and incentivize the kind of housing which we need, which is more affordable housing and accessible housing. Our studies show that there are a handful of neighborhoods that may see displacement. Luckily, we have the relocation ordinance in place, which will protect people from that somewhat. And I am spearheading the effort to develop those anti-displacement strategies. Please remember, impacts of RIP are not going to happen overnight. This is going to take many years, and we have time to continue to get it right.
Good. Another question from our audience. What is the role of the City Council in developing a climate change plan, not for Portland, but for the region? Commissioner, do you want to take that one first?
Sure. Well, I can't remember if I said this earlier or in the interview I did right before this, but we know that climate change doesn't recognize jurisdictional boundaries. So we can do everything right in Portland, Oregon, and still suffer the consequences of climate catastrophe. So it is critical that we are working across not just our region, but the state and with our federal partners. And that's work that I've been deeply engaged in the last 4 years. I helped craft and pass the strongest renewables resolution in the country in 2017. And I am determined to reduce the 40% of carbon emissions currently generated by our transportation system. That's what the Red Lane project is about, making transit more viable for more Portlanders, as well as my focus on safety and equity and making our streets safer for all users, including pedestrians and cyclists. The way we're living is unsustainable, and we have to work together to avert catastrophe.
Thank you. Dr. Mapps?
Sure. This is actually one of the reasons why I want the city to move away from its commission form of government. Right now, our approach to governing Portland reduces our bureaus to silos. So whatever Peabody is doing could be different from whatever is happening over at the Water Bureau. It basically means it's impossible to take an integrated approach to important challenges like fighting climate change, or frankly, even just kind of fighting homelessness. I think we could do a much better job as a city if we hired someone to coordinate services across city bureaus. That way we could actually integrate climate change and environmentalism into the work, every city bureau's work, as opposed to just a couple of people's work. I was over at the Office of Civic Life. I don't know if we ever had a conversation about what that bureau could do to actually fight climate change, but I think that's a discussion that should happen in every program, in every bureau across the city. And when I'm on city council, I will fight for that.
Here's a pretty good question about neighborhood associations. Portland is famous for its neighborhood association system, but can you name some crucial contributions the neighborhood associations have brought to city governance? What are some of the neighborhood-specific issues that have been improved because of the neighborhood association system? Dr. Mapps, you want to take that one first?
Oh my gosh. I could go on forever on this. I mean, one of the things that people need to appreciate is that we have 95 different neighborhood associations. Each has its own strengths and each has its own weaknesses. One of the things that I think is most important about neighborhood associations is that they actually bring communities together and develop strategies for solving hyper-local problems. So I've seen neighborhood associations come together to combat crime, vandalism, homelessness, hunger. They promote social capital. They actually hold leaders, our elected leaders, accountable for the policy decisions that they make. We got some great neighborhood associations who do movies in the park. We got great neighborhood associations who do plant sales. The list of contributions that, the thousands of volunteers who participate in our neighborhood association go on and on. I wish I could list all of them for you, but the most important way to learn about it is to go and visit your neighborhood association this month.
Thank you. Commissioner?
Sure. I just want to take a moment to clarify the relationship between neighborhood associations and city government. Neighborhood associations are independent nonprofits. They are not government entities. And because of that, we have very little control over how they operate or what they do. And that's how it should be. They're democratically run organizations. So we cannot compel them to diversify, and we cannot compel them to support our initiatives. They're really meant as a community voice to counter some of the more harmful things the city has done or has tried to do. I mean, I think the biggest victory, and the victory that really launched the whole system, is fighting back against the Mount Hood freeway. And since then, there have been dozens of ways that they have contributed to our city. I want to point out that my issue is not with what neighborhood associations do within their own communities. My issue is that Civic Life Code dictates how every bureau conducts civic engagement. And with a system that is small and non-representative of our diverse community, we can't rely solely on them for feedback on our policies and projects.
Thank you. We have a question now came through Facebook for the City Club's list, and it is for Commissioner Daly, but I'm going to ask both of you this. I think everybody agrees that there are a lot of fault going on right now with the Portland Police Bureau. On the other hand, not everything they do is wrong, has been wrong. The Portland Police Department has done several things probably right, and we would like to ask you the question, what have they done that you think they've done right? And have you done ride-alongs to get to really know the rank-and-file police officers?
Who do you want to start?
Commissioner.
Okay, sorry. There are many wonderful people that work in our police bureau. And I care about the well-being of every one of them. I'm particularly concerned right now with how exhausted they are, and the fact that many of those good people in the Bureau are feeling extremely disheartened by what is happening right now. It's challenging for me to recount a list of accomplishments when our Bureau is being accused of human rights violations. I do want to acknowledge, I have had negative interactions with the police bureau as an activist, and I've also had the police intervene at a moment in my life where my life was threatened, and I'm a survivor of violent crime. So I certainly recognize the need for police, but I'm just remain gravely concerned with many practices of our bureau.
Dr. Mapps, can you name things that the police department has done well lately, and have you taken the time to interact with rank and file officers?
Oh, sure. Yes, I know many rank and file officers. I used to work over at the Crime Prevention Program, which is essentially the public outreach piece for Portland's police department. And through there, I know what it's like to be a rank and file police officer here in Portland. And I'd ask every Portlander to just kind of imagine what it's like to, put on a police uniform and come into the city and work for the city of Portland right now, given the sort of politics which has been overlaid on their work. Those folks are really pretty amazing public servants. I've seen them do amazing things to help homeless people, to help people who are going through mental health crises. Unfortunately, the police department right now is not doing a lot of classic prevention and community engagement work. I think that's a tragedy. I'd like to get us back to a world where the police engage in community policing. But I think that's going to require some focus from City Hall to get us back there. But that's why I'm in this race. One of the things I want to do is to empower the police to be the best that they can be.
Very good. Thank you. A question for both of you. You've both embraced a list of social changes laid out by a powerful new group of Black leaders in our community, Reimagine Oregon. This group has rekindled conversations that have long been dormant in our community on issues ranging from policing to education to housing and much more. Starting with you, Commissioner, why would you be a better ally for Reimagine Oregon than your opponent? I believe we're not hearing you, Commissioner.
Sorry. Everyone's got to do it once, right? Yes. So I've been working with Reimagine, what's now called Reimagine Oregon, since shortly after the budget vote. It's an initiative led by an impressive array of Black community leaders and advocates, some of whom who have endorsed me, most notably Unite Oregon, which was one of the groups that led to the record-breaking outpouring of support for reductions to our police budget. I'm endorsed by a number of Black community advocates and leaders, especially when it comes to civil rights and police reform. Race is a sensitive topic in this election cycle. What I can say is that while identity and lived experience is important, so are politics. We have a Black man who is our police union president. That has not served us well. And I don't think it's reasonable to simplify this issue based on race.
Thank you. Dr. Mapps, why would you be the better ally for this important new group?
Well, I am a Black community activist. So I think that when we talk about policing here in Portland, it's really important to have Black people at the table. I know everybody's perspective is important and valid, but there is something just unique about being an African American and being over-policed or under-policed because of the color of your skin. I want to change that. I want every Portlander to be well-served by our public safety system, regardless of the color of your skin. This is the fundamental act of democracy. If our city can't serve families that look like mine, then we are not the city that we want to be, and frankly, we're not the country that we should be. So after 50 years of living in the skin of a Black man, one of the reasons I got into this race is to fix this important problem. Literally, my life depends on it, and the lives of my 10-year-old and my 11-year-old also depend on it too.
Final question for this round.
I'd like to use my free speech card.
Fire away.
Ready? Okay. So I do want to finish my thought, which is that identity and lived experience are important. So are track record and politics. Commissioner Joanne Hardesty, who has been one of the strongest advocates for police reform in our community in the last 30 years, as well as on city council, has endorsed me. Eric Ward, civil rights leader, has endorsed me. Kathleen Sadat, another Black civil rights leader, has endorsed me. I'm also the family member of someone who was killed by police. So we all bring unique lived experience to this conversation. It's not exclusively about race, but I have real community support that my opponent lacks.
Final question for this round.
Can I use my card?
I think the card has been thrown down. Please go ahead, sir.
Okay, sure. I just want to say my campaign is, I'm glad that Commissioner Daly has Black friends and Black supporters. I think that's very important. One of the mistakes that we make in Portland and America is to assume that every Black person thinks the same. Actually, Black liberation is about having giving Black people the freedom to actually have differences and have opinions. I also want Portlanders to know that I've been endorsed by more than 150 different institutions and organizations. I suspect a lot of that comes from my long history of working in Portland and working with the community to make our community safer and more prosperous.
Thank you, sir. This is my final question for the round. And who do you support in this surprisingly active and close Portland mayor's race? And why are you supporting that candidate? Dr. Maps, start us off.
I just want to thank everyone who's running. Running for city council is an incredibly tough job. Being mayor is probably the only worst job in town. Anyone who's willing to put themselves through that, God bless, thank you. And when I'm on city council, I will work hard to make you a better mayor, and I know you'll make me a better city councilor.
Commissioner Udaley, you want to take a swing at that?
Sure. Well, I have a longstanding policy of not endorsing in contested races, so I am not publicly supporting either candidate. They both come with strengths. Commissioner Wheeler has experience in elected office, and I'm concerned about the stability of city council at this moment when we definitely have 2 seats turning over, but possibly 3 or 4. I think that could be disastrous in the midst of this crisis. But I'll say that Sarah Iannarone, I certainly feel largely aligned with her policy positions and her politics. We're probably more similar in that regard. But I've had a really great working relationship with the mayor. He has supported all of my major initiatives, and I wish them both well. And Mr. Maps is right. It is one of the hardest jobs in local American politics, and I would not want it myself.
Thank you very much, both of you. It's now time for some closing statements. Since we started the afternoon with Dr. Maps, we're going to begin with Commissioner Udaley. Commissioner?
So you've heard a lot from both of us today, and I want to encourage you to learn more about my track record and my vision for moving Portland forward at votechloe.com. Portland is facing numerous challenges, many of which have been decades in the making, whether it's our form of city government, our neglect of affordable housing, our racist public policies, or our mistreatment of our environment. The work to undo this harm will likely take a lifetime or more, and that is work that I'm truly committed to doing. Over the past 4 years, I've built great working relationships with elected leaders across the state, as well as community leaders and advocates and numerous organizations. My endorsements reflect this, including Senators Merkley and Wyden, Congressman Blumenauer, Commissioner Joanne Hardesty. I'm also endorsed by Unite Oregon, the Community Alliance of Tenants, Portland Tenants United, Oregon League of Conservation Voters, Sunrise PDX, and numerous civil rights leaders and advocates. When you speak truth to power, power fights back. That's an AOC quote. And we see this as some of the most powerful special interests and biggest impediments to progressive change back my opponent, including the landlord lobby, the Portland Business Alliance, and most concerning, the police union. A person who represents a threat to the agendas of these special interests would never receive their endorsement. We don't need another voice on council for these special interest groups. We need a voice for the people of Portland, and I have consistently been that voice, not shying away from hard conversations and passing virtually all of my legislation with 4 or 5 votes. I would greatly appreciate your support and your vote. Thank you, City Club, and thank you, Portland Tribune. Again, votechloe.com for my platform, my accomplishments, and my endorsers. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Dr. Maps? And I believe you're muted, sir.
I'm muted. I don't
Start
know
over.
why I'm. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. A spooky computer thing going on. I just wanted to start out by thanking the City Club for organizing this event, and I want to thank everyone who's tuned in. And I also want to ask for your vote. This decision that you make in this election is one of the most important decisions that I think you can make in Portland democracy. I hope and I want to urge you to think about what you're looking for in your next city commissioner. That's a question I think about a lot. I would argue that you're looking for at least 3 characteristics out of your next city commissioner. You want someone who's a bridge builder, because in order to pass anything through city council, you need to have at least 2 other votes. You also want someone who is a good administrator, because every member of city council is essentially the chief operating officer of at least one city bureau. And you also want someone who's a good listener, because that's what democracy is about. And you're the judge and jury here. You get to decide which of these 2 candidates before you is going to be the better bridge builder, the better manager, and the better listener. I would argue that I perform pretty well on those scales, and the incumbent does not. The incumbent is famous for burning bridges, not building them. The scandals that have plagued the Office of Civic Life are a sign of the weaknesses that the incumbent brings to the management piece of the job. And let me ask you, if you have ever had a meeting with Commissioner Udaley, did you come out of that meeting feeling like you weren't heard? If the answers to that suggest that you should vote for Mingus Maps, I sure hope that you will. And if you're still not sure who you want to vote for, I hope that you will go to our website, mengusmaps.com, and see where we stand on the issues. This is, again, I think one of the most important races that Portland has faced in a generation. We really need your help here. If we come together, we can conquer COVID. I believe that we can reform public safety. I believe that we can bring more affordable housing to the city. We can end chronic homelessness, and we can fundamentally reform City Hall. But the first step to all of those changes is the vote that you cast. So please vote Mingus Maps for City Hall.
Thank you very much. That concludes today's debate. I want to say thank you, Commissioner Chloe Udaley. Thank you, Dr. Mingus Maps, for being with us and for answering our questions. Running for office is a Herculean effort, and serving in office more so. It can be a thankless task. So let us say here and now to these candidates and to all candidates on the November 3rd ballot, thank you. For decades, the City Club of Portland has hosted debates, town halls, and forums, and has written countless position papers. The City Club has done a great service for Portlanders, for those who live in the Tri-County area, and for all Oregonians. Thank you for that, and thank you for the opportunity to moderate today's debate. We will be covering this race and all local races at portlandtribune.com. Remember to vote on November 3rd and vote the whole ballot. For the Portland Tribune and Pamplin Media Group, I'm Dana Haynes. Thank you. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, City Club.